Welcome to the Animation Career Community Podcast, where we answer your questions on how to grow, maintain, and transform your animation career at any stage. I'm your host, Kathy MacDonald. I'm here with my co-host, John Lee. Say hello, John.
Hello, John. Sorry. Hello. Hello, Kathy. And hello, audience out there.
So this episode is going to be a little different from our normal episodes. Normally we have a guest on where we talk about their career. We talk about how they see the state of the industry, what their specialties are and what got them into the field. But today you're just going to be hearing from us. We're going to talk about a bit about our careers and why we started this community. So, John, maybe we can start with you, your thoughts on why you wanted to start this community podcast.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Kathy. I think actually this is a good time to be doing this. I think, our industry right now obviously is going through a lot of turmoil, much like most of the world right now. But I think when we started this, I think, we had very common goals. And for me, the idea of starting a podcast was to not just try to offer some advice and information, but to open up lines of communication across the industry and between people, so we could bring people together and find a way to build a stronger community that can help each other and take care of the community better. I think that for me, that was the biggest goal. It's really networking with everybody and offering a place where everybody could come in, share their ideas with other people, help other people, and have a safe place for everyone to find a way to nurture and continue to grow their careers. So that's kind of an overall, I would say.
Totally.
For me specifically, I mean, one of my goals with having a podcast is to just kind of give back to that community, give back to the industry that has treated me, for the most part, really, really well. To be fair, I know the industry is a tough one and we all go through different obstacles, but for myself, I feel like I've done well enough and it's treated me well and I've met a lot of great people. And I think it's important for everyone in any business, any industry, honestly, to be able to try to share that experience with new people, with other people. And again, keep the community growing in a very, very positive way.
Yeah, I think I share all of those sentiments. And when it came to starting this, my inspiration was a little bit more low key. I just saw a lot of, information I'd learned over the years not getting shared down, things that I'd learned just disappearing because nobody else was mentoring or training or sharing. So, pitfalls that I might have fallen into early in my career that I could share with the younger generation who weren't getting any kind of, management leadership or leadership of any kind. And because of the nature of our work, we move from company to company, project to project. There's no coalescing of information around someone's career. It tends to be focused on the art side of things or the technical side of things, which is totally fair to want to improve in yourself, but there's a lot more to your career than just that side of it. Like how do you navigate networking in this industry? How do you navigate layoffs? How do you navigate workplaces that maybe aren't following general good practices around employment? And there was no one to really talk to about those things. It's in some places in the world, that's the union's job, which isn't really a thing in Canada or hasn't been until recently.
Right.
So it felt like a positive thing to share just simple facts with the community or resources more.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think we, kind of what you were talking about, there are gaps that form, right?
Absolutely.
We all kind of live within our own spheres or bubbles and we focus on what we need to do, especially when you're younger in your career, you're really focused on, kind of getting your feet in and working hard and kind of making and carving out a place for yourself. That when you get to the point in your career, and I think we've all found this, when you start to have to make decisions, whether they're for lateral moves or adjustments to your career, you realize a resource is missing or a voice isn't being heard. And I would say in my case, with my experience, it wasn't necessarily a lateral move, but I was always interested in how the business works. I've always been interested in how business in general kind of works. And when I started asking questions, there were two things that happened. One, there were the gaps that I fell into. I'm kind of, oh, well, no one seems to know, or there's no resource for this information. Or two, when I did ask certain people, I actually did not get valuable responses for a few different reasons, I would assume at this point. But hindsight being 2020, that didn't help me in my career. So I actually had to kind of seek out that path on my own and find the right people to ask, or find people who are willing to share information, because that was, when the industry is bad. And again, as we're seeing it kind of now, people will be trying to hold on tightly to their careers and trying to make things work. And that's totally fair, obviously. But, by doing that, they also limit the amount of sharing of knowledge at the same time. So I think that's something that we as a group here with the podcast want to avoid, because it causes our community and our industry to kind of implode on itself.
Yeah, I think what you're saying about pathways, you were trying to find so many different avenues to find information that I think what we're trying to do here is to just narrow that search a bit for people.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk about your history in the animation community, because you've been working in animation for quite a while now.
Yeah, quite a long time. I guess I'm now one of the veterans. I
know. I feel like a veteran too, and it doesn't. I don't feel old enough to call myself that. No.
It's all in the mind. A veteran can be a good thing. It doesn't matter how many years you've been in. I mean, if you've attained a certain amount of experience, and now you are at a point in your career where I think you can start to mentor other people. And that doesn't mean necessarily that you're putting on like a giant masterclass, but even the smallest bits of advice that can help somebody. I think in a sense, that's your step forward into becoming a veteran.
For sure.
Because to me, that's how I kind of perceive veterans, whether they are older than me, possibly even younger than me, but have something to offer other people.
Sometimes I think about it as people who have been through really hellish productions together. And we afterwards, we hug together. We're veterans of that experience.
It's kind of like a post-trauma experience. And I think perhaps that's the way we see it, being of, I'm not going to say old generations, but older generations in the business. But I think for me, I've been in the business now just about, what year is this? 2025.
Yep.
So just about 25 plus about 8. So about 33 years.
Wow.
So yeah, I think this is my 33rd year. So I did graduate from Sheridan in 1992. And in terms of my kind of path to get here, I guess, it was, it was a good path, but obviously it wasn't an easy path. I would say most people would probably look at their own history and probably say a similar thing. It was never really easy to kind of get into a new career, especially once you come out of school, college, university, whatever that may be.
And it's not just easy. It's not straightforward. I think we all think it's going to be step 1, step 2, step 3, or we'd hope it would be that. And it's never so straightforward.
Yeah, I think, having said that, it's funny in my brain, and nothing against the colleges or the schools, but oftentimes, and I think Sheridan, especially when I was there, they did have this mentality that was like, if you're here in the Sheridan animation program, you are the cream of the crop, essentially. And when you leave here, you're going to be in such demand. Like there was that kind of sense, not that they could back it up and say, well, now you've got a job for life kind of thing, because that doesn't really happen in animation. It rarely happens in anywhere else in the world.
That's so funny that you say that, because I had the exact opposite experience at Sheridan.
Okay.
Because I didn't graduate in the 90s. I graduated in the early 2000s. So I think it was around 2005. And all of my teachers had come out of like a low period for the industry when 2D was finishing before CG took off. Right. And they were all telling us, get ready to be paupers, get ready to struggle for your art. If you're not willing to do that, you shouldn't be in this industry. Right. So they're quite negative about our chances.
Although that's probably fairly realistic. And I know it kind of sucks to hear that, right? No one really wants to hear that.
I
But I
think
think,
it was too negative. It
okay, yeah,
hasn't been indicative of most of my graduating classes
right.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, yeah, you're right. I mean, there has to be a certain amount of balance, but I think realism um, is better to prepare people because and let me kind of wind back a little bit because when we entered Sheridan, it was that attitude. You're kind of the cream of the crop. There are only a couple schools in the world,
Yeah, that's true.
right? Sheridan, the big animation schools. So there was Sheridan and CalArts in California, and OCA, called OCA at the time, had an animation program, but it was very technical. Um, and there may have been a few other odd schools. I think Vancouver had in their film school, they had an animation course or something like that.
Yeah, there was Max the Mutt when I went to school.
Yeah, Maximut didn't exist when I was in Sheridan, but it's funny because I think after my second to third year, the sentiment became a little bit different. And I think we can always edit this out too. Um, the teachers became so disappointed in my year that, yeah, and this is a reality. Again, they were so disappointed in my year that they basically decided to just let as many people graduate as they could. I think the reality there was that they didn't see our year as quite as strong as previous years. And so in our third year, my year in third year was the first third year course where they reintroduced animation assignments in the first semester. So we no longer had a full year to work on our films. So we only had half a year. And then they said, and then second semester, you get to work on your films. And most of us were like, well, we don't have enough time to work on a full film then. And they said, well, you're just going to have to cut it short, find a way to make it work. And of course, I think if I remember correctly, by the time my third year ended, I think there were only 3 finished films, like 3 finished in color. And the rest of us maybe at different stages. Like I got most of my rough animation done, but I had to trim the idea down quite a bit. It went from like a 1 minute high action, like I wanted to go almost feature quality, but I knew as a student I couldn't do that, but I wanted to get as close to that as possible. So I ended up cutting that 1 minute kind of proof of concept teaser trailer down to like a 30-second commercial, essentially.
Yeah, that's so interesting because Sheridan changed so much in that gap between you being there and me being there, because like digital, some of the digital aspects of animation were coming in. We were using computers. We had a full year for our third year to finish our films, although, you know, there were shenanigans in my year too. Because they were changing over to a degree. I mean, we could go on about the school aspects of the industry. You know, I think both of us are lucky in ways to have gone to Sheridan because it carries clout with it. But at the same time, it's not a perfect experience. It's not like the end all be all for education in the industry. And I think now we can say that there are other ways to get those skills, of course, beyond just school. And so once you graduated, did you start working immediately?
No, it took actually, well, okay. Context wise, yes, almost immediately. I think a lot of people forget that once you leave school, there's not necessarily a job waiting for you. Yeah. And for me, that was kind of the case. It took me, I think just about 2 to 3 months, which isn't a lot of time.
No, that's really not bad.
So I was very fortunate, but I was very lucky as well, because at the time I graduated, there were very few jobs around. So I think within the first year, only a handful of my graduating class actually got jobs, and literally like only a small handful. For me, I did kind of what we did back then. There was no real internet. There was no like billboards or, you know, like forums online to say, hey, we're looking for these people for these positions. Nothing like that. So I had to open up basically the telephone books, the old yellow pages, and I looked for animation studios. I tried to go by word of mouth. I visited a few places and got either animation tests or some tests, or just dropped off my portfolio at studios like Nelvana, which was you know, around at the time. There was another one that was just called Phoenix Animation. It had kind of been renamed from a different studio. Yeah, that happens a lot. Yeah, very, very often, especially back then with especially with Phoenix Animation, because I think it went through a couple name changes. Very appropriate name then. Yeah. Yeah. And there were a couple of smaller kind of boutique commercial studios, like Lightbox was around, although I don't think I applied to them. But I think I did apply to Animation House, which was around quite a bit. Um, anyway, so for myself, I actually got a call from Nelvana because they had lost a person on their layout crew. And the supervisor of the department, or at least that project, saw my portfolio, even though they weren't hiring directly at the time. He actually ended up seeing my portfolio and thought, oh, this person, John, maybe he could do layout. And so he called me up and he asked me, like, what are you doing? Are you interested in doing this? And I basically said yes. But the side story, which I think I've told to a few people before, is that when he asked me about layout, my gut was saying, don't do it, John, don't do it, because I hated layout in school.
Oh, yeah, it wasn't my favorite one either.
Yeah. And it wasn't so much that layout was a bad thing and that I felt like it wasn't for me. I think it was just the way it was taught was very mechanical. It felt very assembly line. And I didn't want to feel like I was just a cog in the machine. So my original gut instinct was just to say no. But there was like the smarter part of John said, you know what? There's a door that's opening. You should just try to put your foot in and see where it takes you. Yeah. So long story short, I had to do a layout test over that weekend. And very kindly, the supervisor said, if your test looks even half decent, you're guaranteed the job, because I know. Oh, well,
that's a nice. That's a really nice way to go into a test.
It was very, very kind. I don't know if that was true. Maybe he was just saying that, but I did the test. I remember it was a Babar test. I think I did 3 or 5 scenes from Babar, and then I handed them in on the Monday. I think I dropped them off first thing in the morning. And I think it was later that day, like that afternoon, he called me back and said, John, you've got the job. Can you start tomorrow?
Oh, wow. That's such a good feeling, eh? Your first job. I still remember getting my first offer and how excited I was about it. Would you say that your path from that layout position was like directly into something you wanted to do, or did it take you some time to figure it out?
I think it was both. Well, to be honest, like I think it was a bit of both. It was the path that I needed to go along, but at the same time, it gave me time to really think about where I was going, because again, I think a lot of people don't really understand the way the business works, especially when they first get into it.
Yeah, you get a window into how production works for sure. Yeah. I mean, maybe we should say now what you do, like where you've come from that position.
Oh, so yeah, so that's kind of how I started, with that slight regret that I was getting into there. And so as of today, I am actually one of the co-directors at Industrial Brothers on Dino Ranchers Island Explorers. So it's basically a new spin-off series of the Dino Ranch brand. We've done 3 previous seasons, and it's an amazing show about 3 kids with their dino pals who ride around having adventures. And in this new version, they're basically on a tropical island with an underwater set. So we've upped the ante in terms of the adventure, the excitement, the action, some of the danger.
And the technical demands too, right? Underwater is not super easy. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it certainly isn't easy, but we've got a great crew, and we have a lot of the same crew that we've had in the past. So, I have all the faith in them, and they're amazing people. We've got a lot of talented people.
Yeah, you've also been nominated for, was it the
CSA, yeah.
The CSA award, yeah.
Yeah, Best Direction Director, and that's for a particular episode of Dino Ranch Season 3, which it's funny because, very quick side story, when that episode came up and the script had come up, I'm like, oh, this is kind of a fun episode. And not that I didn't think too much of it, but I was kind of like, oh, it's a good episode, fairly strong. There's a lot of comedy involved. That's one thing we do try to inject into Dino Ranch, and make sure there's a good balance of comedy to balance out a lot of that action, because Dino Ranch, even for preschoolers, has a lot of stakes involved. So we find comedy helps just tone down the amount of danger that the kids can get involved with. But that particular episode, when it came through the first, I guess, the storyboard roughs, I could see it was developing into an episode I was really going to enjoy. There was a lot of life to it. Storyboard artists did a great job with some of the acting and the posing. And then when we pushed it into the animatic process, there were a lot of little things I was like, oh, we could do this and we could do that. It would just kind of elevate those elements. Some of the comedy, some of the character stories, I think that was happening, or that were happening in that particular story. So we really attacked a lot of things about it and really just pushed it as far as we could go. And I remember, fast forward, we get to our kind of our online preview, and everybody watched it. We had our crews from both IB and Janfield, our service provider and one of our partners at the time. And everybody watching it. At the end, everybody was just so amazed by it. They enjoyed it so much. And I knew that everybody had done a great job with it, that it was going to be something really special. So I'm really happy for the crew for making that episode. They really did all the heavy lifting. And they really deserve that nomination. And if we win the award, they deserve that award too, obviously.
For sure. Yeah, it is such a team sport. And personally, I love that experience of seeing something coalesce that way, and not just from a personal enjoyment of my own work, but seeing everybody's work come together is really satisfying.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. You go through your career and there will always be those ups and downs, and there will be highlights and sometimes those little lowlights, and hopefully you can grow from those low points, but that makes the highlights even better.
Totally.
And I think, seeing my career where it started, like I said, that, Smart John, door open, put your foot in, it's layout. I know you don't want to do layout, but try it anyways. And I did learn to love layout. I think that was the lesson I learned by doing the first contract with Nelvana. And that was a show called Dog City. So it was a Henson show.
Oh, cool.
That had live action puppets, the Muppets, obviously.
That's so cool.
Yeah. And then an animated segment. But I learned from that experience that layout basically wasn't quite what they taught us in school. And there was a lot more to it that offered being creative and potential for being creative. So
yeah, I think any role in animation and film can be perceived as very technical, but there's always an element of a personal creativity that's there that you can find. I know personally, like for a long time, I sort of avoided working in VFX animation because it felt like a bit limited because of the live action aspect of it. But when I started working in it, I actually found it more creative. I found it more problem solving. There were some of it to due to lack of planning, but then that fell on me to find fun and creative solutions. And it was really exciting to me to do that. I think when you're working on a show where everything's very highly storyboarded, yes, there's room for creativity there as well, but it's a different kind of creativity.
Of course, yeah. And I think it's great that, your experience allowed you to spread your wings, right? Like you realize, oh, there is more I can do and more that I can offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Let
me ask you, sorry, not to interrupt, but let me ask you, how did your career start? Because you mentioned going to Sheridan as well.
Yep. So I was really sure that I wanted to be in animation when I was younger. Maybe you were as well. I feel like a lot of people I meet in the industry have that similar background. They knew from a young age. No,
not me. Sorry for anyone that isn't watching. I just shook my head. Mine wasn't quite as clear cut, but we'll get to that afterwards.
Okay. So I did a lot of drawing when I was younger, and because I knew I wanted to go to Sheridan, I actually did some coursework before that so I could get in, because it was really hard to get into Sheridan. Like there's and I think it's really hard now too, in a different way. And when I got to Sheridan, I actually wasn't sure if it was the right choice for me, because I was very into the artsy fartsy kind of filmmaking and storytelling, and Sheridan's a bit more on the technical side, which is great, honestly, but that's kind of what you want in a school. And then when I graduated, I was really, really lucky as well. I did a test for a stop motion company here in Toronto, which doesn't exist anymore, called Cup of Coffee Animation.
Cup of Coffee, all right.
Which I ended up getting hired as a junior animator, and I loved working there. I worked there for almost 8 years on and off. It was such a great formative experience. Working in stop motion is a bit more like working on a film set. So it was very demanding physically, long hours and things like that. But I learned so much. And I got to do lots of different things. You're dealing with more physical world aspects like cameras and lighting, and like, with stop motion as the animator, you're in charge of the camera for camera moves. Like the lighting and film department will set you up or help plan it with you, but then you're responsible to make sure that that camera moves properly. That is not always the case in stop motion. Like, if you get to very high end stop motion, they have huge mechanical rigs that do it for you. But Cup of Coffee was a very fly by night kind of place, like do it yourself, which was, which is fun too.
It gives you skills.
Yeah. And I was looking to make a move from stop motion into films, feature films. I think a lot of people when they're younger, that's the ultimate goal, to work in feature films. And so what I did was, when I knew that we were getting laid off, like the whole company was getting laid off, I'll use this time to make my own short film. So I did a lot of it myself. I made a small 3-minute short film, which is online. But I did employ some of the people I worked with because they were unemployed as well. Most of them did it pro bono. A couple of people I paid where I could. And that was maybe one of the biggest learning experiences I've had in my career. When you do everything yourself, you're managing the project, you're writing it, you're problem solving as you go. Like, I remember almost near the end of shooting that project, I realized that the ending didn't work. I didn't like the ending of the film. So I re-storyboarded it, and I had to use what I had, right? Like, I couldn't necessarily build a bunch of new assets. I couldn't, I had one set. I had two technically, but it was like one repurposed. Okay. So there was a lot of problem solving there, but I was really happy in the end that I did that. So even learning, okay, sometimes you got to pivot from your plan too, is useful information. And that really got me my big break going out to California, and I worked in feature films, stop motion feature films, on a project for Henry Selick, which ultimately was canceled, which was just devastating. But oh dear, I got to work with the best people in the field. I got to see how it's done in the States, which is really different from how it's done in Canada. There's a different mentality going from TV to film, which was really eye-opening. And when I came back to Canada, I came back because I got laid off, but also because, my father was sick at the time. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to get into CG because there's some work here in CG. In some ways, I think of that as a similar pivot to what's going on right now for a lot of people. They're trying to figure out what's the next step. And at that time, I was like, okay, I'm just going to throw myself into CG work. I was also doing 2D work at the time. I was just working nonstop and training. And I found out that I really, really, really liked working in CG. And I've been working in CG, television, film, VFX since then, different softwares. But coming from stop motion to 3D was actually not technically the same. Like, the software and how you do the work is really different. But I found it gave me more control over what I did. The physical world is a limiting factor in stop motion. So being able to go into the computer and really fix things, change things, you don't realize how many opportunities you don't have in stop motion. Like, if I only have one opportunity to shoot a shot, I only get that one shot at it, right? And it might work out, maybe I'll go back and change something if it needs to be changed. But in some ways, that limiting factor is really motivating, because you're like, I got to get it right this first time. But it stops you from experimenting. Sometimes you're like, well, I know this process is going to work, so I'm not going to try this extra little thing because I need to get this done. Where in the computer world, you can just give it a little try, see what it looks like. And so I found that extremely creative and interesting. And I really love working as an animator. I've worked as a supervisor a few times now in stop motion and in CG. And that's sort of my work history up till
Amazing.
now.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah, like, for me, there was always like a part of me that kind of wanted to get into a bit of stop motion eventually. But I just got carried away on this animation train to wherever, right?
Well,
I think that happens.
There has to be an opportunity too, right? Like there's no stop motion studios in Toronto right now, or there's no big ones anyway.
Yeah. I remember
there's a little one.
I remember with Cup of Coffee back in it may have been the late 90s. I just signed a contract. I was still at Phoenix Animation, and we're working on, I believe it was season 2 of a show called Eckhart about these mice that lived in PEI. And I think I was about a month, maybe a couple months into that contract. And Cup of Coffee, one of their producers, approached me and asked, John, would you like to direct one of our shows?
Oh,
I can't remember what show that was. And I remember speaking to her on the telephone. And, I said, thank you so much. I really appreciate the offer. 2 things. One, I've just signed a contract, and I was an AD on Eckhart at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But I also said, but my knowledge of stop motion was so limited. Like I knew what stop motion, I know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I know kind of how it works, but I have no real practical experience. And I said, therefore, I must decline because you're asking me to direct something I don't know enough about. And she said, are you sure about that? I'm like, yes, I'm sure. I said, I would feel really bad if I were to step into a position like that, flail around and watch as all the departments kind of have no faith in who I am as a director. Right. And I think that was for me, kind of a growing up point. That was like a point in my life. And there have been many where you make a decision and it's the right one because you're being responsible, like an adult should, in a sense.
Yeah, I mean, I would push back on it. It was probably the right decision for you, but I think having worked at Cup of Coffee for a long time, they hire a lot of people with almost no experience. When I was supervising there, my entire team was animators they weren't even animators. They hadn't even graduated from animation school. So I was teaching a very low-level animation class for every single individual while shooting a production. So it was very intense that way, but people who are willing to learn, who are willing to reach out and accept expertise from the people around them, they can go far. If you're willing to accept that, okay, this isn't my area, I'm ready to learn, even as a director, I think you can be received positively, because I have worked with directors in stop motion who didn't necessarily know what I was doing, but who would take my guidance if I explained what was needed or what the limitations were.
Yeah. I think most of the best directors I know of are that way. Their minds are open. They're willing to learn because they know they're not necessarily the specialists in every single department. I think that's important. And I think for me, just at that time, it's one of those things where I felt like my career was starting to move, like with the kind of at the time 2D animation, and my drawings were getting better. Everything about my talent was still growing. So I felt a bit more comfortable about like now moving to the next stage or next level. And I felt stop motion may not have been in the cards for me. Yeah.
And I think that's what I meant by like, it was probably the right decision for you. Like you have to weigh your desires, your choice, like where your direction, anytime you want to take a job. I mean, something that I've always struggled with, which is not a problem right now, is when I have multiple offers on the table.
Right.
That is one of the hardest decisions to make. It's a nice problem to have, but it can be really intimidating because you don't necessarily have a picture of what the future is going to look like. So you're just kind of guessing what's going to be the best opportunity with what's presented to you at the time.
Yeah, I think, and everyone will make a decision in those situations, hopefully make a decision that is best for them. And
totally.
Sometimes that comes down to the length of contract. Sometimes it's the amount of money, and that's totally fair. Because our contracts are not lifelong contracts. So people want to make sure they can support their family. And sometimes, like I know in my case, not too long ago, I was offered 3 different contracts at the same time. And I chose the one because the show had a lot more heart to it. Maybe I'm being paid, sorry, you can edit that. Maybe my choice was consciously, I knew I was probably not going to be paid as much, but I felt like the show that I decided to go with had a lot more value to me as a director and to the audience as
Mm-hmm.
kids watching and understanding what the show is about and getting something back from the show, I think. So,
Yeah.
not that the other shows were bad, but I
Mm-hmm.
think for me, I was kind of like, no, that's a show because it makes me feel like it would be a great show to work on. It's a great crew, and there's emotional value to the stories.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the thing you're weighing can be as simple as, this is a new skill I'm going to learn. I'm going to make a little bit less money, but it might open
Yeah.
doors for me elsewhere.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be as high level as like this project's going to change the world.
Right. Yeah.
Although that's nice too when that happens.
But
it's
if it
harder.
happens, that's great.
Yeah, it's harder to plan for that. It's easier to look at your career from a standpoint of like your own personal goals and make choices from that. So,
Of course,
which sounds like that's what you're doing.
Yeah. All right.
So maybe we could talk about like a time that you might have struggled personally in your career, like maybe you had a period of unemployment, maybe you were not happy at the job you're in.
Yeah, I think like most people, there's always been moments like that, like of varying degrees, varying intensities, even. I would say probably the very first one I would like to mention, because it is something that comes up with a lot of people, especially in our industry, is burnout.
Mm-hmm.
And in my case, my burnout actually happened very early on. It was, as a matter of fact, right after my first contract at Nelvana. So having gotten into layout and doing all the layout and struggling a little bit to learn, okay, this is what layout really is about. And I can see like it's worth a lot more than what I felt it was worth. Having a great team to work with, the supervisor really helped me along, and a lot of the other crew members were great. Taught me a lot about pushing my posing, even in layout. I think that was a great thing. But I still felt like I had to work hard because I was not, by no means I was ever a golden child coming out of Sheridan or anything like that. So at the end of my first contract, we got laid off, or a bunch of us got laid off. And then there was a new project that it was going to start just a few months later. But at the time, because work was kind of thin, especially around those years when I graduated, generally what would happen, especially at Nelvana, would be they would keep a skeleton crew on just to fill gaps, help out with other shows that may have been wrapping up, or maybe some development that had come up. But there was another show that was coming up later in the fall, and I wasn't on the skeleton crew because I was obviously last hired. So, so I was on a bit of downtime. I started looking for another job. I'm kind of, okay, well, it was a short contract, but I learned a lot. Let's see what else is out there. And there really wasn't much else. But what I found was in that time, like hopefully most of us and most people out there, I'm like, okay, I'll spend this time and try to improve my portfolio. Now that I've gotten some experience, I can see where my portfolio coming out of school is really lacking. So I started working on this. I think it was end of September, maybe October. And I started getting really sick at the time. I started feeling like I had the flu, and I went weeks with this feeling. And I'm like, oh, there's something really wrong with me. Because the flu normally doesn't last quite that long. So I went to the doctor. Long story short, they did all these blood tests. I think they took about 7 vials of blood from me, ran a bunch of tests, and everything came back negative. There was nothing physically wrong with me. But I'm like, so what is wrong? Like, I don't know what it is. And the doctor suggested, that I was under a lot of stress. And he asked me what I was doing. I'm like, well, I don't have a job right now. So maybe that's a bit of stress. And I kind of mentioned some of the stress I went through coming out of that first contract. And he said, well, I want you to talk to someone, just talk to a therapist or a counselor, and just kind of let's see if we can zone in on what was happening. Because honestly, I didn't feel like I was under any real stress. But having talked to that counselor and describing kind of the work situation in that first contract, I was working like 12-hour days. I was going in by 8 in the morning, working all day long, and leaving sometimes way after 8 p.m. Because again, new to the industry, I was like, I got to prove myself. I got to improve. I got to prove that I belong here.
Yeah, that's such a classic experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it turned out it was stress. So what was happening is as I started working on my portfolio, every time I picked up my pencil to draw, I would start to feel like I was going to throw up. So mentally, it made the connection between working so hard and just drawing. So my body was shutting myself down immediately. So
Wow.
I was like, I don't know what I can do with this. The counselor had suggested you need to take time away. Like you need to not draw as much, try not to think so much about working so hard, find a hobby, go
Mm-hmm.
take a walk. Like even if it's a 10-minute walk every single day, no matter what you're doing, take time for yourself. Because I was literally working and then I would come home. If I didn't have dinner, I'd be eating dinner at like 10 p.m. and then watching more animated films to study,
Yeah.
the way we all do. And so it led me on a path to find hobbies, to find ways to relax my brain, to not focus solely on work. And again, find that kind of pseudo balance we all strive for in our
Yeah,
lives.
I mean, that's a tough lesson to learn, but it's
It is.
interesting that you learned it so young too. Like, and what's interesting, I think, is that you really addressed it initially too.
Mm.
I find a lot of people push through that kind of burnout until they really are in trouble. But it sounds like maybe you were already.
I think I was burnt out. I think my body just, everyone reacts to things differently, right?
Totally.
Whether it's a cold or a flu. I was always really bad with flus. Like if I got a flu, I was in bed for at least a week.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas some people I know, they'd be like in bed for a day and then next day they're fine. They can move around.
Yeah.
And I think I was very lucky because I did experience it early on, where we tend to be, and it's so true. Like when you're younger, you're a little more flexible. You're a little more resilient. You can bounce back a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not to say that that experience is something people should go through.
No.
But I think people need to be aware when you feel like you're getting really stressed out, you need to kind of stop. You need to stop, take a step back for even a moment and give yourself room to breathe and find another activity. If it's a hobby you already have. If you don't have a hobby, I always suggest to people you find something else, because life is not just about work.
Yeah.
Life is about everything around you.
Yeah, listen to your body, listen to yourself. When you're in that work regime, it's really easy to turn all those things or ignore all those things. Turn that feeling off. I mean, that experience really mirrors an experience I had too when I was working at Cup of Coffee. It was my first animation directing job. I was very driven because I felt there was a lot of pressure on me, and I felt very passionate about the crew that I was leading.
Yeah.
And, you don't know what you don't know. And I really put it on myself to fix all the problems. And like you said, I was coming in before everybody, leaving before everybody. And it didn't manifest exactly the same way, but I remember emotionally being quite down, really down, like to the point where maybe I was drinking too much, because you go out with a lot of crews do that. They work really hard and then they drink a lot. And in the film industry, that's definitely part of it. Yeah. But I remember thinking that it was the end of the world sometimes. And that's the wrong context for something like that. It wasn't all on me to fix everything. So it was a valuable learning experience, but it was a very tough experience to have, and setting boundaries would have been not just healthier for me, but probably fine for the production too, So
yeah, I think we often take everything onto our own shoulders because we feel like we have to be responsible for every little step we take and every little move we make. That's a song of some sort, but I think it's New Kids on the Block or something like that. Sorry. But yeah, we end up, putting so much responsibility on ourselves because we take pride in what we do. And as artists,
we take
it's
it personally,
easy for that to happen because we're putting a bit of our own talent out there for the world to see, for our crews to see. We want to be engaged with them. Totally. And I think people need to, again, it is hard to recognize the signs of burnout. Sometimes you don't see it, you don't feel it until it's too late. But I think you have to try to be aware and be conscious of where you're going and many hours you're putting in and the amount of work that you're doing. Just try to keep an eye on yourself and try to, again, find ways to balance your lifestyle a little bit more. That's
Yeah.
always going to help. It may not completely deter that from happening, but it gives you avenues and options to try to mitigate the amount of stress you would go through.
Yeah, it gave me the opportunity to reflect on what I really wanted out of a job.
Yeah.
Was I knew that I didn't want to do that forever. So when I search for work now, I use that as context for, is this going to go down the avenue I don't want it to, or is this going to go somewhere where I can really shine? And I think these are examples of negative experiences,
Right.
but they weren't all negative, right? Like I loved the crew on that
Yeah.
project. I liked the show we were doing. It was a funny show.
Hmm.
You know, I learned a ton, and I still am friends with the people that I worked on that project today.
Yeah.
So even though it was really a negative experience on a burnout phase,
Yeah.
it had some good sides to it as well.
Of
And
course.
I think maybe you could talk about like what's a highlight from your career that you look back on and you're like, oh, I really made it.
I think, yeah, I guess there are two ways to see that. I think kind of really made it is, to me, it's obviously, I think probably the first time I became an assistant director.
Yeah.
And that was on a show, I believe it was Mumphy, the little the little elephant in a pink jacket with a scarecrow friend. I believe that was my first time ADing, if I remember correctly. Now that I'm getting old, my brain cells aren't functioning quite as well. But that's kind of an obvious sign in terms of a career highlight. I think when you make it to either an upper position, whether it's upper management or you become a supervisor or anything like that. But I think for me, the most memorable ones are the people I've worked with. And I know that sounds a little cheesy.
No,
but
that's
it's so
exactly how I
true.
feel too. Yeah.
It's so true because those are the moments when you remember working with those people and how they were to be with and how they helped, hopefully, your entire crew work through situations and brought a little extra sunshine to, the productions that you're on. Those are the things I remember the most and I'm the most grateful for. And they come in varying degrees, as always, with different people, different reasons. But it's always one of those things when I remember those people, it almost, again, hindsight being 2020, you realize, oh yeah, that show really wasn't that good, but the people were so amazing that it didn't matter.
Yeah, that's really been my experience too, that the crews you work with are actually the best part of the job.
Yeah.
I've had some highlights, like when I was in California, working with those people were definitely highlights. And I got to meet Brad Bird and show him some of my work. So that's very memorable. But when I look back on like the really positive parts of my career so far, it's always just been the crews and the people. And most of them tend to be great crews. Like,
of course, yeah.
There's few people here and there who make it tough, but mostly the crews are really passionate about what they're doing.
Yeah, and I think when you're in the same boat, with like-minded people, then you feel like this boat will never sink. It doesn't matter how much you're bailing out that water.
Yeah.
How many holes are in that boat. But when you're with a great crew, it's like, we're going to get through this. And you know what? If we had to die at sea, I'm glad I'm dying with everybody here because you've all made it so amazing, right?
Yeah.
I know that sounds weird to say, but it does make me feel that
Sometimes
way.
it feels that way for sure. I find that every production I've worked on, there's a period where you're like, how is this possibly going to finish? How are we possibly going to get this done?
Yeah.
And then the crews come together, you do it. Sometimes it's worse than others. The solution is more over time, but there are times when that's not the case too. That's interesting. I think if you talk to most people in animation who've had some experience, they'd probably reflect that opinion too.
Yeah, I think a lot of it too is knowing your crew, knowing their talent, and knowing they are talented. Like they're there for a reason. For the most part.
Putting some trust in your team. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think empowering them to use that talent. It's like, okay, we've got a situation. What can we do about it? You're the expert here. You tell me what you would do, right? You give them that power to say, hey, I'm going to help problem solve this.
Yeah, because like what we were talking about earlier, where I was saying like I felt the whole production was on me. The truth is it wasn't.
Right.
There's no way I could have fixed every problem,
Yeah.
and that was a big learning experience for me as well. That I need, micromanage it. Not that I was micromanaging, but that I felt a need to keep track of everything that way.
Yeah.
Where if you empower your crew, which I did in later teams, the outcome was way better. People were more motivated to do it, and it was more satisfying to get it done too. Yeah. So I know we were going to talk a little bit about some questions we got from your storyboard group.
Right.
We don't have a ton of time to do that, but there are a couple questions that I think we should talk about. I think generally what I heard from your storyboard group was worry and anxiety about what's going on in the industry right now.
Yeah.
I can't blame anyone for feeling that way. I've certainly experienced that as well. I'm not working right now, so I've had periods of downtime, but this is pretty long. And I think whatever we give as our answers, people should understand that it's all our opinion. It's a lot of it's just speculation because we don't know all the answers to these questions either. We can offer maybe a broader context based on our history, but then a lot of what's going on in the world right now, economically, politically, is beyond our control, and maybe doesn't have a historical context towards animation as well. So, it's a new world that we're entering.
And just to expand on that a little bit, I know, there is all this worry and people want answers. I think that's because they want clarity on as far as what's going to happen and what will happen. But the reality, especially in the political sense, there's so many factors involved with what is happening to our industry that it's not a simple answer as a yes or no. This is why. And whether or not, we can always talk about tariffs and blah, blah, blah. But the whole process of tariffs is also very complex. It's not easy to say, our animation industry will be tariffed, because tariffs don't really work that way. There's a whole legal process that they have to go through to make something like a tariff work on our industry. So I just wanted people to understand there's no yes or no answer. It's never quite as clear cut as we would hope, because we would like clarity as quickly as possible. But yeah, we just have to kind of ride it out a bit, be informed. And this is kind of the point of the podcast. It's bring people together. We can have these discussions. Everyone's opinion is going to vary based on their experience and their situation as well.
Yeah.
But I think if we stand together as a community, we can actually provide some support to each other and a little extra knowledge as to what may or may not happen.
Yeah, like you said, it's very complicated, and it's not just one thing; it's many things.
Yeah.
And all we can do is, try and zoom out and look at the broader picture, and make our own decisions about what that might be.
Sure.
And the more information you have about a situation, the more you can make a decision about what you're going to do. So one of the first questions we have here is, what do we personally see as the future of the Canadian animation industry? Obviously Canada is a part of a big global animation industry.
Yeah.
So we can look at it on a provincial level, or we can look at it as in that global context. But what do you think, John? What do you think the future is?
I think, as tough as things are today, I feel like we should take this as an opportunity to really move our industry farther forward, if that makes sense. Because as long as I've been in the industry, I feel like Canada has always lagged behind a bit in terms of IP. I think most people will agree with that. We spend a lot of decades being more service studio as a whole. We've generated some interesting stuff, and there's no doubt about that. But when it comes to building an industry on solid original Canadian IP, I feel like we've always lagged behind a lot of other countries and a lot of other industries. So with these possible threats and kind of the lack of investment now that we're seeing in the Canadian animation industry, I think we have to kind of reconfigure ourselves. Now, that's always easier said than done, because that can't happen without proper investment. And where does that investment come from, right?
Well, and the whole entertainment industry is reconfiguring itself, right? The big studio system is clearly not the way the industry is going to go, in my opinion. There is so much more online independent creative stuff happening. So there is an opportunity, I agree, for Canada to move into that space, especially if the audience is global.
Yeah, we have the talent, right? We have all the talent, but I think we need more visionary leadership at the forefront. And that has to start also with the government, because in the past, we have funds like CMF and, what is now Ontario Creates. We have funds available, tax credits, grants, whatever, from multiple bodies, to be honest. But, there's always been a bit of a lack of a push for really bigger picture, bigger, harder hitting IP. It's always been kind of stifled a little bit by production, pipelines and workflows, and kind of what I think a lot of the rest of the world sees Canada's film industry as, which again is a bit more on the service industry side.
Yeah, we have to remember where it started from, right? Like we started in a space where there were only a few people purchasing products like this. Canada didn't have that much buying power because we were a smaller market. We only had a couple networks that were producing their own work. So in a way, the industry grew because it had to. But it has become over reliant on that service work. It has, you're right, it has caused a stifling of, independent, more homegrown projects. Where that investment comes from, I guess, should be partially government, but maybe it needs a relook. I'm hoping that that the government is actually reevaluating this grant system on a countrywide perspective, because of the nature of individual provincial tax credits. That is a limiting factor for sure.
Of course, yeah. And a lot of that obviously is to make the provinces compete, but also develop their own kind of talent within their borders. And that's a fair point. But I think one of the big things, and I've always kind of complained about this, even when I started my career, is the reliance on the American broadcasters, because that's been so true during my lifetime. It's, oftentimes a project would not get picked up unless they had an American broadcaster signed onto it.
My experience working in the US gave me sort of a perspective of there's a different mentality to risk in the US than there is in Canada, which I don't think is better or worse here.
Right.
But we're a little bit more risk averse, which is maybe why you see that. But we're also a little bit more, when there's less risk, there's less catastrophe.
Right.
So I don't know if that's totally true, but my experience in the US, it shows me that people are always feeling a little bit like close to the edge, like, getting laid off is going to be a catastrophe, where in Canada, because we're a bit less risk averse, we have a bit more social supports. The risk is lower. So people maybe don't feel the need to be driven as hard, which isn't good or bad. It's just different. It
is different. Yeah. And I totally understand that, because those tax credits and grants really give us a good base to kind of work off of. And we know that, with those tax credits, we can hire Canadian talent, whether it's animation or live action. But if you look at the live action model, there's, in Canada, there are a lot more independent live action producers who take more risk. In the animation industry, it's not quite as strong. So I would like to see more a push in that direction. Because, Canada is its own nation. We have our own culture. Obviously, there's always been a push for Canadian content, which is nice. But I think we may need to kind of see a little bit beyond that and create product that has more global reach as well.
Yeah, I think when you look at individual creators right now who are putting stuff online, that is really where you're seeing the most expressive things happening, which is not always an option for everybody. That takes a lot of work. It's,
of course, But, once it's there, for independent filmmakers, like yourself, when you did your film, and hopefully me one day, because I've just been too busy to make my own film. But, to get eyes on your product, whether it's on YouTube or wherever else, those eyes can come from anywhere nowadays, right? Like when I started, there were only a few eyes watching, but now you have eyes everywhere, whether it's on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. wherever, your own website now, you could have that. And if you can promote it well enough, someone's eyes from any of these broadcasters, or now we have streamers involved, right?
Yeah, I mean, that comes with its own challenges. Like, how do you get noticed? There's so many more voices present, right?
Yeah.
Something I wanted to talk a little bit about, which came up in our question period, was specific to Toronto. And the reason I want to talk about this is because I'm affected by it specifically as well, which is I think it's Ontario Creates has a tax incentive to hire people locally from Ontario, which I've worked under for many years. And up until recently, when work from home became a thing, this wasn't an issue, but there is a tax bump for companies who hire people outside the GTA of about 10%. Your whole crew, most of your crew has to be from outside the GTA to qualify. And in the past, companies would have worked in the office. It would have been hard to hire people from outside the GTA because it's a big area. It's from like Oshawa to Burlington. But now with work from home, GTA companies can now qualify for this tax bump by hiring outside the GTA. And what that means for people who live in the GTA, like myself, is that we are excluded from all Ontario Ontario jobs. But not just that, I also don't qualify for Vancouver, BC tax credits. I don't qualify for Quebec tax credits. So it's a real oversight in the Ontario Creates system. And hopefully it'll get addressed. You know, I've talked to my MPP about it, but obviously it's not a top priority for the governments right now, as there's a ton of stuff happening right now that is very high level.
Yeah. That's certainly one of the reasons why there's a little less work in Toronto on your scene.
Yes.
And for a while, actually, you did see some studios open, like a satellite studio outside of the GTA. Now, having said that, most people may not know this, but that tax credit, that it may not have been Ontario Creates at the time, but there was a tax credit like that going back to, I think, even the late 2000s, where if you did hire outside of Toronto and the GTA, you got an additional 10, maybe 15%, I think it was.
Yeah. And I've read through the current tax credit, and I think it is geared mostly towards the film industry to try and encourage productions to shoot outside the GTA. And you're right, it has been around for a long time. And it does encourage some studios to open, like Pipeline, for example, in Hamilton.
Exactly.
But, you know, setting up a whole new studio requires investment, which brings money to a local economy. Where a Toronto studio or GTA studio, they don't need to reinvest in the community. They're just plucking people from outside of the GTA. And as it's already more expensive to live in the GTA than outside of it, it's pretty damning that I'm competing with people not just 10% cheaper than me, but a whole team of individuals who'd be individually 10% cheaper than me. So I'm just knocked out of the running automatically. Companies fairly are looking for ways to save money right now. And it's just something that was designed to encourage economic growth is hurting individual artists.
Yeah, I think that's a case where a lot of companies, you know, it's understandable, whether it's the province or federally, that, you know, they want to encourage development in these, different areas, more remote areas where people have similar desires and dreams to enter the animation industry or live action, whatever industry it may be. So, you know, definitely we need that to happen. But I think part of the balance is the studios also need to, this kind of comes back to what we were saying earlier, you know, being less risk averse, right? Toronto studios have to kind of invest a little bit more if they want to compete and get the talent that they want that is locally found. Like if the talent they want is in Toronto, they're going to have to like adjust their budgets, because, you know, just because that tax credit is offered outside of Toronto or the GTA doesn't mean they have to use it. It just means their production at the end of the day is going to cost that 10 to 15% more.
Yeah, I agree with you. And unfortunately, I don't see the studios taking ownership of that.
Right.
You know, I think it's an outdated tax credit. The government is creating this problem with this tax incentive.
Yeah.
It's on them to fix it, because the studios individually are always going to look.
They're going to take advantage of stuff like that. Yeah.
And rightly so. They're there to make money. That's their goal. And the government is trying to encourage economic investment from them.
Yeah.
So it's just outdated. It needs to be readdressed in a world where we work from home. It's just a different world than it was back then.
Yeah, and I think that for sure. I think as we are mostly remote still, and some hybrid, some studios are hybrid, it shouldn't really matter. And again, we are all part of the same country. And even with the provincial differences and the tax credits and grants and stuff, and I said earlier, we should start breaking down some of those obstacles and some of those barriers.
Yeah,
because you can find talent across the whole country now.
Ideally, it would be countrywide. It would just be a Canada-wide tax bump, wherever you're living in Canada, and maybe looking at how do you address those areas outside of big hubs, and how do you encourage growth there. But this is not helping. It's just hindering, as far as I can tell.
I feel like we need to create like a little council, because it's not there's not a simple answer to this question. It's like every other question, right? Because now you're dealing with municipal, provincial, and federal levels of government.
Yeah.
The funding comes from so many different layers and so many different organizations within each of those jurisdictions.
For sure.
That it'd be nice. Yeah, of course. The way we're talking about it, it's like, it'd be nice if we could just break down all these barriers, but we're talking about budgets across all these bodies.
Absolutely. So, it's not a simple, there's no simple solution, but at the very least, it shouldn't encourage discrimination against people.
Yeah.
So let's go into one more question that we have. Do you want to read this one, John?
Oh, yes. So, oftentimes you're asked, this is a very common question, but, what transferable skills do we have as artists to branch out to a new career, and how to apply them? And I know for myself, I've done that a little bit. Like I've been able to get into some illustration and graphic design, things that are kind of related, and I can use my skills in animation. I will kind of, with the caveat that I did study some graphic design in high school, and I did work a couple of jobs doing that. So I have a little bit of experience with that. I think there are always ways to find a new use for your skills that you develop in animation. Why don't you start, Kathy? Like how do you feel about that, and what have you been able to do?
Yeah, I think you make a really interesting point, which is that it's a very individual question. Everybody has a different background, education, experience, even hobbies, for example. And this is a thing that I'm thinking a lot about too, because for a long time now, I've also been thinking, like, where can my skill set also go? And part of the process I'm working through is trying to reevaluate what my work experience has been. So looking back on past experiences and seeing and trying to see like what skill set allowed me to do that problem solving, allowed me to do that position. So that's an individual process, which takes some time. I think for me, it's more like, where would I point myself? But for some people, the question is different. It's like, how do I get money today? Right.
Right. Yeah.
So there's different pressures. And the thing I would say about almost everybody who works in the industry, probably everybody, is that we have to adapt really fast. We adapt to every single project we're hired onto. We have to adapt to new technologies. We have to adapt to new pipelines, because every studio has a different process. And, through some of my research, a lot of these processes are called something else in a different industry, but they have a lot of overlap.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a soul searching experience right now. But I'm getting out there and talking to people. That's a big step. Just talking to people about like, what are my experiences? What are things I'm interested in, and seeing what they think, getting outside input. So that's my first step, is more of a fact-finding mission than trying to like really nail things down. And I understand that that's hard if you need to find something now. So, if you need to find something now, I know people who are doing retail jobs, who are doing service work.
Absolutely.
There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, it's sort of a return to my early career, because the industry was low then as well, like you were saying, John. And, it doesn't feel great, but I think if you change your perspective on it, and you could say, well, what's the best I can do with this moment of time,
Yeah.
and try to embrace that, it can help a bit.
I think for sure. I think, people shouldn't, kind of poo poo, moving into different areas to have that job. And again, to pay for the roof over their heads and to help support their families. There's no shame in doing that at all. Right.
Absolutely.
This is what life is about. And I know it's an obstacle that people don't want to hit, but it is part of reality for a lot of people right now. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I think I like the way you kind of framed it, which is looking for overlap. Finding things that you are good at that you do in animation, but perhaps there's other stuff that you do overlap in animation with something else. And for me, some of that overlap was some of that graphic design. I've been able to do some logo work, design work in the past when I've had some downtime. Or even when I didn't have downtime, I was like busy, and someone I know has a friend that like needs a design, a logo design or an entire package, logo design, letterhead, all that. And I have the skill to do that. So there are always ways to kind of find those overlaps. I think as you're doing, you need to kind of look for them and be aware. I think also look at even some of the hobbies. This is going to sound a little weird, but for me, for some people, they know that I've been figure skating for such a long time. I did it for just about 20 years. And there was always a part of me that thought, you know what, if the business gets really bad and I needed a job, I would try to do part-time figure skating coaching for kids. I would just have to get my certificate, get my coaching certification, do, kind of my first aid training. But that wouldn't take too long. And the reason why I thought that was because figure skating, kind of to link it back to what we discussed about burnout.
Yeah, for sure.
Figure skating was a hobby I started to learn when I was burnt out. And it was a thing that I would honestly say, not just save my life, but save my brain, save my mind, gave me that escape from animation, from working all those hours every single day. But in doing that, I learned to love figure skating because I was never a skater before that. I couldn't skate worth a damn. But it gave me something physical to do, which is different than us sitting at our tables drawing all day. But it also exercised a completely different part of my mind and my body that way too.
Yeah.
And I found learning figure skating, much like maybe a lot of people listening right now do dance or some other physical activity, you realize that, hey, what I learned in doing figure skating applies to the way I draw bodies in motion, right? Whether it's life drawing or animating characters, I learned about balance points and how the physical body moves with the muscles and everything. So that became that overlap for me. The more I understood in figure skating, the better my animation became. And the more my animation got better and my design sense got better in terms of, studying silhouettes and drawing that way, the better my silhouettes on the ice could become. So there was always that overlap just kept growing and growing and growing. A mentality going from an artist in front of a desk to an artist on ice also started to grow that way. And I felt, you know what? I got to the point where if I could teach kids how to skate, I could give them that part of me and give them a part of me from animation that could, inspire them to do better on the ice. So
yeah, so much of that is about self-reflection too.
Yeah.
It's about saying, I really, what are the things I really enjoy about my job? What are the things I enjoy about life? Where do those overlap? And it's amazing you brought it back to burnout, because I think having a well-rounded life, it just not just in your work life, but in your home life and your personal passions, it gives you a resilience for when these periods come around,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, every hobby or everything you do in life is going to, be a different kind of path, and that path will always have ups and downs.
And they may not relate directly either, but there's always some overlap, I think.
Yeah. I think you realize, even if it's the smallest of overlap, you realize how lucky you are that it did happen. When you find things that you enjoy. If you can enjoy working in animation, And that can be hard at times. We've all been there.
Yeah.
But you then realize you have a hobby that you can enjoy and take your mind off the tougher times sometimes. But when you develop that overlap, you feel complete, right? You feel like, oh, these are all these different paths, like different branches, but they're on the same tree, and that tree is who you are.
Yeah, I think it comes back to what we were saying earlier about like everyone's career path looking different. So say that you're in an early stage of your career right now and the industry is really in trouble and you're wondering, well, is this a career I can have? There's no way to really know what the future is going to be like, but to take the moment and understand that it's not your fault. It's not necessarily to do with your skills. That if you do something different, you may end up doing something different. You may end up coming back to it later. It's a really unclear, like the path isn't clear cut, like in some industries. And in terms of translating your skills to other industries, I think the same can be said that there are people in other industries who've come from other backgrounds too. So it's a good idea to talk to those people, talk to people who have done that before you.
Yeah. And you don't know like where your reach will go. And that's, again, kind of what I was saying earlier about why we wanted to start this podcast too. And the ACC is you want to be able to inspire other people, and you want to be able to give them that opportunity, whether it's through knowledge or resource or your own advice, whatever that may be, to hopefully give them a step up and encourage them to keep going with their career. Because, no career is easy. And I think that's kind of, again, winding back, another thing that I find is a highlight over my career, and maybe in life in general, is when you've given someone advice or you've influenced someone somehow, even in the smallest way, and one day they come back and tell you how much that means to them, right? When you hear that from someone else, it's incredible. It's like being a teacher and you've taught a class, and 5-10 years down the road, you see one of your students again, and the student says how much they appreciated what you taught them or what you said. Or even, again, that one moment, maybe you took them aside and say, oh, I noticed this, but if you can just work through that and you give them that support, I think to me, that's another, example of those moments and highlights that I do appreciate.
Yeah, I think you're right. It comes back to why we decided to do this, because of how important we feel that experience is, and how there's kind of a gap in the community for something like that. I think we're coming to the end of our time now.
Yeah.
This has been a really good conversation. We have more questions from your storyboarding.
There's always going to be more, just to let the audience know, we've got tons of things we can talk about in certainly more detail. And, we're going to provide more episodes, obviously, with more content.
Yeah. So thanks for being here with me, John, to talk about this more personal topics.
Well, thank you. Great to have you on board, of course.
Yeah, and I look forward to our next guests, whoever they might be. We've already had a few good ones, so look forward to those coming out in the near future.
Yes, looking forward to it too, and looking forward to sharing it with everybody so that they can listen in and hopefully join the community. Oh, and very quickly, I just wanted to say we should give a shout out to Kyrene, of course, who is going to be working behind the scenes on the podcast, but she's a very important part of our group, the ACC.
Yep, she's an integral part.
Yes, very, very important. The three of us, I think, are a good little group, and we hope to invite more people in to listen in and join the community and help us grow.
Great. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Kathy.
The Animation Career Community Podcast is created and hosted by Kathy MacDonald and John Lee. Music by Mike Romaniak, mixing and editing by Kathy MacDonald, and produced by Kyrene Kim.